This episode of the Unbuild It podcast is brought to you by Huber Engineered Woods. When we talk about Huber Engineered Woods, you know, we say they make Advantech, we say they make zip system, you know, they have liquid flash and subfloor glue and tape. And I think that most of our listeners are fairly familiar with their product lines. They make really high quality stuff that makes our job easier. But I also wanted to let you know that they have a couple of new products on the market that they just announced at IBSX for 2021. They have Advantech X Factor, and they have a new vapor permeable tape. And I think that those things are very important because they go to show what Huber Engineered Woods is really about. They're innovating and they're problem solving before even builders like myself have asked for those things. That process of innovation has kept them at the top of the game, at the top of the pile, and that process of innovation has caused builders like myself who are focused on durability and energy efficiency and really doing things the right way the first time to believe in them as a company and to use their products. We've been using their original Advantech formula since the late 90s as a company, and we've been using this zip system since 2013. So I think that proves to you my belief in the company. I hope that you'll look into Huber Engineered Woods, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast. Let's talk construction management software and what makes a software good. First, I'd say the ability to tackle the tasks that I need it to do, but more importantly, the ability for my team to comprehend the software, my clients to comprehend the software, and everybody involved to actually want to use that software or that interface. BuildBook could be that software for you. BuildBook is simple to learn and use. It allows for constant communication between you, your team members, and your clients. It doesn't waste time with unneeded features, and you won't have to send your team across country to learn how to operate it efficiently. At the end of the day, BuildBook should reduce your stress and your team's stress as well. BuildBook is an all-in-one construction software for today's builders. Whether you're a one-person operation or a large building crew, BuildBook has plans to fit your budget. They don't have any of those nagging sales calls or tricky upsells or hidden fees. You can sign up for a 10-day free trial with BuildBook so that they can teach you and show you what the value is of their product. You should head over to buildbook.co to get started. Don't forget to mention that you heard it from us, the Unbuild It podcast. That's buildbook.co. Thank you, BuildBook, for your sponsorship. Welcome to the Unbuild It podcast. Today we are going to talk about radiation or radon, or the second biggest cause of lung cancer in the United States, which is something we as builders and designers and consultants and homeowners and occupants of buildings should probably be concerned with. I wanted to say welcome. I'm Jake Bruton, and I'm going to let Peter Yost say good morning.
Good morning, Jake. This is Peter. I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
Yeah, hello, everybody.
He's so excited. So this conversation on radon, I think, best starts with kind of like a definition. So radon is a radioactive gas that is naturally occurring, caused by decomposing stuff in the ground. And the reason it isn't a problem outside is because it mixes with so much other stuff before we breathe it that it gets diluted. But the reason it can be a problem inside is because it can grow to concentrated levels. And it's measured in the same way that they measure radiation, which I didn't know until I started researching the topic so that I'd be more informed for this podcast. I won't pretend to be overly educated on the topic prior to us deciding to record this. But I had forgotten that the EPA has a radiation calculator on their website. Have you guys ever played with this?
There's a radiation calculator? Huh.
Yes. So you can, and it's like, I don't know, 30 questions or something.
Huh.
But you can calculate how much radiation you're exposed to and how much radon you're exposed to, which is actually pretty funny because how can they, I mean, like,
Right.
okay, maybe it's a ballpark, but I think the idea is that the EPA just wants you to be afraid of what's out there. On a side note, the things that it asks you, like, do you wear a wristwatch that glows in the dark?
No kidding.
Do you live in a stone, brick, or concrete building? Do you live within 50 miles of a nuke plant? Do you live within 50 miles of a coal plant? How many cigarettes do you smoke a day? Are you a radiation worker? I'm pretty sure that if you're a radiation worker, you need to be using something other than the EPA's website to calculate whether or not you're at risk. There is a how many miles do you travel by jetliner a year question.
So, Jake, this is all sort of types of radiation.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting.
But it also includes radon because it talks about where you live, which was pretty interesting. In case you were wondering, I am exposed to 503 millirems of radiation a year.
I knew that was the problem. I knew that explains a lot.
But that's below the national average, actually. The national average is 620. And just for argument's sake, the millirem conversation, I was trying to figure out a way to quantify that. And the example I found from the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission was 1 millirem is equivalent. You would get 1 millirem if you lived in Atlanta for 3 days, Denver for 2 days, and I'm guessing that's an elevation closer to the sun sort of thing.
Interesting.
A year of watching television, and I don't know if that means 24/7, 365, or if that means like the standard American's input.
And if it's bad television, it goes up or something?
Yeah, or a year of wearing a glow-in-the-dark watch.
Wow.
So when we're talking about this, I think that we can assume that a millirem is a small dose because it's not dangerous to live in Atlanta from a radiation standpoint.
Yeah. But it's tough because the radon is a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas. I mean, that's one of the things that makes it tough.
And so we can start by saying the code has a zonal map by county. It's all, whatever that is, 4,000, 3,000 counties in the United States. So there's a map of every single county in the United States and its declaration according to a survey census of radon. So you can find that in the ICC or the IRC. I think in IRC it's Appendix F for those of you that are nerdy and gonna go and look this stuff up.
And so in the zones, Jake, the zone 1 is the highest rating?
Which is double what zone 2 is. I'm not sure if I understand the rating system. It's like parts per, but it's not parts per million. It's something that I don't necessarily understand, and I don't have a problem admitting that. It's high radon is what you should think of.
But it's soil measurements. And and so the difficulty is translating a concentration of radon in soil to what it might be in your house.
Yep. And as we talk about every time, every house is completely different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a hard line to draw there from A to B. So the code does what it always does, and it just goes, yep, it's going to be a problem.
So zone 1 is the highest, and that then you're required to put in a radon system for that?
Yeah, so the code reads that if you are in zone 1, you have to put in a passive radon system. And if you are zone 2, I believe it just says recommended, and then zone 3, it doesn't talk about it. The other distinction that we were just discussing is it's not just zone 1. It's anywhere your municipality says you have to put it in, too. So I'm not on the zone 1 list. The county that I live in, Missouri, Boone County, is not on zone 1. It's a zone 2. However, we have passive radon requirements in county and municipality.
What about you, Steve, in Massachusetts?
We have radon requirements for every new house, I believe.
Yeah. So you have zone 1 and zone 2 in Massachusetts, but there's sort of an overriding decision made by either the municipalities.
What's interesting about Massachusetts is where the mountains are in Massachusetts, it's zone 2, but the coastal region is zone 1. You would have thought it would have been the inverse.
Yeah, the radioactive decay is, I always associated it as being higher concentrations in granite areas. But we have plenty of places that have sandy soils where the underlying geology must support, has radon, because radon's a breakdown gas from, radioactive uranium in granite primarily.
Yeah, well, you have to remember that it's not just the presence of radon; it's its ability to move through that soil. So it needs to be, it's pervasive or porous soil or aggregate.
When I went to work at the NHP Research Center in '93, the NHP Research Center had just completed work for HUD on radon. And when I talked to the engineer who headed up the study, he said, Peter, you could have two houses right next to each other. Clearly, they're experiencing similar radon concentrations, but one house would be below the threshold limit without a radon system, and the other one would be above. And he said we just never could find a consistent pattern. Hence the reason that, EPA says, hey, when in doubt, install a radon system. And you can't go just by soil concentrations and maps because we don't completely understand how that gas works its way inside buildings or how it does at different rates. Hey, I like to tell a quick story. Can I tell a story, Steve, or is it kind of...
Ooh, a Pete story. I didn't know we were going to get a Pete story today.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the way they discovered radons in buildings,
please do tell.
There was a nuclear worker in a new plant that was under construction. There wasn't even any fuel in the building yet. And everybody wears a jumpsuit with a dosimeter. And this one guy was constantly setting off the alarm as he checked out each day. And they said, where the hell are you going in this plant? We don't have any fuel in here. And he said, this is my job. And so they eventually decided this guy's dosimeter must be getting triggered someplace outside of work. So they tracked him home, and every day he took off his jumpsuit and put it on top of the clothes washer in the basement. And so they went to measure the radon concentration in that basement. And I think it was in like 2,000 picocuries per liter range, just incredibly high. And until, I think this was in the 80s, maybe I can't remember whether it was the 60s, 70s, or 80s. But when this was first discovered...
all those times blend together for you.
That's right. But that's how they discovered it. We didn't know to worry about radon concentrations inside buildings until that particular circumstance generated research. And, we measure picocuries per liter, like, what the hell? Pico means 1 trillionth. So a pico, 4 picocuries per liter is 4 trillionths of a curie, whatever the hell that is, right? Because I don't know how that compares to millirems, but it's per liter of air. And, for once, we got it right.
It's kind of like me being 1 trillionth of a millionaire.
Yeah, that's very similar. But for once, the U.S. uses metric, right? Picocuries is not a American measurement, and liters are, what's the system? The international system.
I don't know, but I'm just
so guess
wallowing in the fact that you're confused. It's entertaining.
But So here we are using picocuries per liter, and all the rest of the world uses becquerels per meter squared. And you know why they do that? I think they did it like, we'll show those Americans. They think they've switched to the right units. We're still going to make it different. So for those of you who are outside the U.S. listening to this podcast, you probably measure becquerels per meter. There are 37 becquerels per meter squared in 1 picocurie per liter. So
Please tell me you just knew that off the top of your head.
No, I have to look it up each time. But I have had to, I did some webinars for Canadian audience. Had to translate it. But anyway, pretty small amounts. So where did we go from there?
That's why I started laughing, because I could just see Steve shaking his head. Well, let's since we started the conversation with what the code says, let's talk real quick before we go any further about how the code asks a builder to deal with it. So it's like there's 5 things. Do we want to play the guessing game, Steve? Do you want to guess those 5 things that the code says?
I hate guessing games.
Are they 5 of your favorite
anyway?
things? Because then we can sing.
5
of Steve Basic's favorite things, all about Radon.
Isn't that Sound of Music? Is that where that comes from?
Yeah.
5. Okay. All right. Well, you said it like I'm just trying to catch up, man.
We've had specific requests for not letting Peter sing on the podcast, by the way.
Oh well, you should have let me know. Okay.
What are the 5 parts?
5 parts. Bass, tenor. Oh no, you didn't mean. You meant 5 parts of the radon system. Free draining gravel under the slab.
I would call it air permeable.
Or gas permeable if we're being
gas permeable air.
Okay. And then how about we just work our way upwards from there?
You got to have like an impervious layer on top of that gas permeable air.
The code calls for 6 mil poly minimum.
Steve, we're 2 for 5.
Yep.
Wow. We're on a roll. How about it has to be released above the roof line?
It does say that. You skipped a layer through there, though.
You didn't say we had to go in order. You just said what are the 5 things?
Do we need to... Okay, so we probably need a T down in the pipe underneath.
But why can't it be an L? Why can't it be an L?
The code requires a T, and it requires 2 feet of length on each side of it. It also requires the pipe to be 3 inches. Since
all right.
neither one of
well,
you
I
know
failed that
size.
once or twice because I've done L's before because the only place we could get it down is on that side of the house.
Interesting.
And we're bumping into the footing, so that's actually good to know.
There's one more measure that every system will have. Now I said that. No, not every system. Most systems.
Do we have to wire in the attic in case we move from passive to active?
There is a requirement for us to put in power for a future fan so that you could have fan-assisted radon to depressurize that down there more fully. And the only thing that you guys missed is the
vertical riser
floor system. The floor system. So, I mean, if you were going to do this in a crawl space, your 6 mil poly potentially is enough.
What about a vertical riser? No mention of that? Like minimum size?
You said through the roof.
Yeah, but it should have some kind of size. What if guys did a 3/4 inch condensate drain line?
The code does say 3-inch diameter pipe.
Okay. See? So there you go.
But
well, sorry.
He already mentioned
I'm just trying to get to the bottom. Don't be sorry. Be informed.
So how might, as a builder, besides that, how might I also deal with radon inside a home from a mechanical standpoint?
Put the house on piers.
That's mechanical?
Well, it's a form of mechanical.
It's
like Hate Steve morning. It's like Hate Steve morning here. Hey, welcome. It's the Hate Steve show starring Pete and Jake. Watch as Pete and Jake come down on Steve today.
Let's back up for a second. I would have top billing in that show because am willing to hate on you more.
So, Jake, are you saying that we could use a system different than that slab depressurization?
So I was kind of just leading towards the idea that when we put ERVs in our houses, we ask our tech to balance it so that the house operates under slight pressure, which has to also cut down on the possible intrusion.
Interesting.
Hey, here's an interesting thought you guys will both appreciate, because we always talk about testing, validation, and all of that good stuff. Has anybody out there ever done, or is it regular operating procedure to do a radon test prior to a whole house renovation or major construction, so that you understand where you are versus, and then having it tested in the end? I've only done it once, and it was because the client wanted it, and it was an order of magnitude difference.
Well, you're not going to be surprised to hear this, Steve, but when we moved into our house, I immediately measured the radon level.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
But I did it.
Did you measure it in picocuries or the other something square meters?
Picocuries per liter, because the meter I use
so you're
reads
just
out.
anti-European now.
I have to multiply by 37.
Okay.
For those folks. But anyway, so here's the funny thing is that.
The funny thing is that as soon as you moved in, you tested. That's the funny thing.
So it was 6 picocuries per liter in the basement, and like around 2 picocuries per liter on the living spaces above. But when we air sealed and insulated the basement, it went to 13 picocuries per liter in the basement. So
is that because you cut out all the natural leakage that was letting it out?
Well,
you cut out all the dilution, probably.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I'm saying.
Well, and that's the rub, is that, the Energy Center in Wisconsin some years ago did a test of before and after radon measurements in homes that were being weatherized under the federal program. And about a third of the time after energy retrofits, the radon went up. A third of the time they went down, and about a third of the time they stayed the same. And so we don't completely understand how radon moves through slabs and concrete walls, because I think in my case, when I insulated the basement, I didn't do anything to deal with the gas permeability of the slab, but I did, certainly slow down air leakage through the above grade portion of the walls. So I think there's ways that you can get increase or decrease with weatherization, but the important thing is you probably ought to measure before and after, as Steve stated.
So here's the big question: did you put in a passive system?
No, the radon tech that we used said, because you have a crawl space at a different level, I'm going to have a really tough time installing a sub-slab depressurization system because of the contribution of the crawl space. So this is interesting. He said, I'm going to install a heat recovery ventilator that just services your basement, which means we're
just diluting it in a different way.
Right. And so I don't think the EPA encourages solution by dilution as opposed to a sub-slab depressurization, but it is an acceptable form of radon mitigation. So, I've continued to measure radon levels over the last 18 years in our house, and it is interesting to track because I was talking to Terry
I would
Brennan.
love to see that spreadsheet, by the way.
I was talking to Terry Brennan about this because Terry Brennan did some of the testing with the Housing and Urban Development Agency, and they found that radon levels inside buildings responded to atmospheric pressure, which means that atmospheric pressure does have an impact on air pressures 8 to 10 feet underground. They respond in a time lag, but they do respond. And I find radon levels in my home changing with how cold it is and atmospheric pressure. And there is a delayed response, but my radon levels do respond to atmospheric conditions that change how much of that radon shows up inside my house. So I dilute.
That's interesting.
I have a 3-speed HRV, and the guy told me just set it on high. That's 200 CFM, and that'll keep you below 4 picocuries per liter. But what I do is I have the meter running in the basement, and I change it from, there's 3 settings, 100 CFM, 150 CFM, and 200, and I run it at different speeds because I can. But
assuming that you pass on before your wife, when you are no longer maintaining this house, do you think she'll just go, yeah, I'm moving? I don't want to deal with the stuff that Peter did every day.
Peter's got so many things jury-rigged. I've thought about that because I was talking to a radon tech at the B4 conference up in Wisconsin many years ago, and they said, we don't trust those electronic meters. We find that you have to double check them against what's called an alpha tracker, which is a different type of radon test. And he said, we're nervous that the subslab depressurization systems, homeowners don't mess with those. But if you have an HRV in the basement,
they're idiot proof.
Yeah, but if you have an HRV
that
system,
thing's loud. I'm going to turn it off because I don't want to hear it today. Yeah. And then nobody turns it back on.
Exactly. Ever. And an HRV also, it doesn't have the service life. Like he finds that they'll go back and no one's changed the filters, so everything's running perfectly, but the HRV is completely clogged, so it's down at something less than 100 CFM, and the radon levels have gone up. So if you're using something like an HRV, it's just like anything else in your house. You have to maintain it.
We also slightly glazed over what the passive system does. We just talked about diluting or running a house under pressure, positive pressure, so that there's less infiltration from outside. The way the code suggests you do it with a passive system, it's just a path of least resistance. It just gives the gas a place to escape where it's not going to be challenged. I feel like we kind of glazed over that and didn't really explain that. So I just wanted to make sure we covered that one.
And so if you install a passive system and you can't get it below 4 picocuries per liter, then you cut that pipe in the attic, right? And stick an inline fan in there and then plug it in, and that sucks the gas out. So the active system, is like somebody sucking on a straw all the time at the top of your building to pull that gas out.
So one of the things that I was thinking of when I was looking at this too, and I never actually read this section of the code before yesterday, the power that it says that you should put there to be able to add the fan that you're talking about, both times you said it in the attic. But there's nothing in the code that says it has to be in the attic. It just says inline fan.
Interesting.
Yeah, it could be in the basement too.
And so, we have one going right now. The attic won't be accessible, so we're putting it in the basement. And I had never thought about it as being in the basement until the project that Steve and I are working on right now. And
guys, are you ready for this? It's the difference between push and pull.
The Zen moment with Steve. We got it early today.
There you go.
And do you think it matters?
I think if the pipe is sealed, I don't see how it matters.
Yeah, I don't think it matters.
So here's an interesting thing too. Why did we arrive at 4 picocuries per liter?
I don't know. But the attic is probably quieter. Especially if it's a vented attic. Right.
Sure.
And if the fan has any leakage or anything, at least you're leaking it into the ventilated attic, not into your basement too.
For sure.
Good call.
I'm just going through the benefits of attic installation for
also, if it's in the attic, no one's ever going to notice if it stops working.
No.
Yeah, you'd think that they require some sort of indicator or an alarm or something, but so the 4 picocuries per liter,
you're going to die.
There's nothing magical about it, but when I was talking to that engineer at the research center, he said, when we installed the subslab depressurization active system, we could only consistently pull it down to 4 picocuries per liter. So that number is not magic in terms of human health. It's just magic in terms of you're going to struggle across the country to get it below that 4 picocuries per liter with the system as designed that we described with those 5 parts. But the other thing is when they first discovered the radon in homes, there's only been one really longitudinal study, and that was in Iowa with farm wives. And the reason for that is because that was the largest population of people who spend a lot of time indoors and live in the same house from birth to old age. So they targeted Iowa farm wives because they spend, traditionally in the olden days, more time inside the house than anybody else. And they tended to be born and raised and continue to live in the same house. And Iowa has high radon levels. So when we look at human health,
Iowa is pretty much the only state in the United States that is all zone 1. It's the only one that's just one zone.
Huh.
Every other state has multiple zones except for Iowa.
So, Jake, those numbers about radon being the second, leading cause of lung cancer.
Lung cancer.
That's largely based off of that Iowa study.
Yeah, the thing that I saw was that EPA says it's like 20,000 people a year die from lung cancer caused by radon in the United States.
Yeah, and
which is like, holy cow! How is this not a bigger conversation than before?
Well, and even when the legislation was written, it's written so that if you test, you must report. But when you sell a home, you can't refuse to test if the buyer requests. But there's nothing to say. I mean, nowadays every home inspector tells the client you should do it. You should ask for a radon test, right? And the other difficulty is that if it's part of a real estate transaction, then you do a 3-day test. Well, I can tell you, depending upon the 3 days that you pick, you're going to get very different numbers because it changes so much with atmospheric conditions. So,
So should I test on a rainy day or not?
Well, in North Country, you test on a day when there's mild conditions, because if there's no drive, then, less radon is moving through the building. And there's 3 types of radiation, alpha, beta, and gamma. And the gamma rays are the highest energy and have the most potential for damage, but they're blocked by like a piece of paper. And the gamma rays are the most penetrating. But like an alpha particle, which is the radioactive component of radon gas, that's blocked by just about anything, including your skin. So you could say, well, why does radon only cause lung cancer? Well, it's because the only way that it's a threat is inside when it gets to real sensitive tissues in your lungs, because you're sucking it in. But they're big, slow particles compared to the other forms of radiation.
So does wearing a mask does wearing a mask decrease my radon intake?
I bet it does.
You would assume.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see in the last year if there's a reduction in radon fatalities.
Well, if people are wearing their masks in their homes or where they're spending a lot of time, which is also interesting because what about radon requirements in non-single family detached homes? Like, let's say you're a landlord, right? And what responsibility do you have to test for radon because you have people living in your house that, aren't family? Or what about schools? So it turns out that rental situations vary from state to state, and so do schools. So some states you've got to test and control for radon. In some states, there are no rules. And the same for if you're a landlord. If a tenant comes up to you and says,
after we get done,
if a tenant comes up to you and says, "Hey, what are the radon levels in my home?" It varies from state to state as to what the landlord or landlady is required to do. Yeah. The only thing that's national is your own home.
Interesting. Now I'm just picturing the small independent school that my kids go to and the rubble foundation that's underneath that I hadn't considered at all.
Oops.
Let's talk about, and this one doesn't have to be a guessing game unless Steve wants it to be. Let's talk about like the simple ways that we get radon through a slab, built just prior to the radon rules coming into the code. Besides just it diffusing around the edges of a concrete slab that was poured up against concrete walls in a basement, you could have control joints that then crack, that then you have extra cracks in your foundation. You could have pipe penetrations going through that aren't detailed well. You could have like a to daylight floor drain in the basement or something like that picks up soil gas. The one that I always thought of, and I think it's because I feel like I could always smell it, is the tub box. That 2x4 box that every plumber uses to get his plumbing close to where the tub's going to go, that never got filled in for decades and decades and was just open to soil.
So you mean in a slab on grade, Jake?
No, that's how we did it in basements forever too.
Oh, interesting.
Is they just do a 2x4 1 foot square knockout in the concrete in the basement and fill it with gravel, and then they dig the gravel out and get to the pipe, connect the tub, and then shove the gravel back down in there, and you were effectively connecting anything under the slab to that. Odie, by the way, the flashing company, makes a plastic box, pour-in-place box for that now. That's a fantastic solution as well.
Cool. I was thinking sump pump lids because, some of those are designed to be gas tight and some aren't.
Most aren't.
Yeah, most aren't. So that's a pretty
well,
big
and
source.
good luck getting your sump pump pit detailed to the slab so that it doesn't have leakage around it too.
Yeah, which also brings up the issue of radon in water, which my understanding is that's way less of a threat, but there are some places where the concentration of radon gas in water is significant. It's much less of an issue, but it still is an issue for those people who are digging wells.
You should be more afraid of stingrays and sharks instead.
So, Steve, when you are designing a house, how, I know that you plan for all types of mechanical considerations. How often is it a challenge, or is it just pretty easy to throw it through a chase that's gone top to bottom?
It's actually pretty easy because what I typically do is I just take the different floor plans, basement, first, second, on a 2-story house. Single story is real easy, but 2-story house. And I just copy the plans over to the side and I change each one to a different color. So, it might be white basement, red first floor, and green second floor. And then I just superimpose them and register them on top of each other. And look, you could look at the plans and say, okay, somewhere over here's a closet. Here's this going up through the second floor. Maybe just thicken that wall to a 2x6 wall and we can snake it in. But if I'm doing a new house, I have the radon vent typically on the basement plan and I have it dimensioned.
So you mentioned that one time you had to do an L. So generally you're looking to put that chase in the middle of the building.
I'm trying to get it in the middle of the house, but
that
sometimes with these, gymnasium open floor plans, there is no wall or anything in the middle of the house. I thought about just running it up through the living room, painting it black, and having it more as a sculptural element.
How did that work?
Make a soffit come over to it so it looks like a
nobody's
beam,
bought
so
into that idea
beam.
yet. Nobody's bought into that idea yet. And on retrofits, if we do a significant retrofit, I'll call to crack the slab and put a 8-foot pipe in and tee it up and run it up through. Especially if like your house, if the retrofit was like rehabbing the basement and fully insulating it to a livable level and stuff like that, we add a radon vent for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
also from a design standpoint, you're not putting ductwork below slabs or in crawl spaces that are connected to soil gas, correct?
I have never put a piece of ductwork under the slab.
Are you thinking about that to make sure that that was a true statement?
I am thinking.
You're looking up, going,
and it's
it
wasn't ductwork. The one time we did it, it was an elevated slab on grade house, but we did an air intake for the fireplace below the slab level.
But Jake, that's a good catch. All the Levitt townhomes, in the mid-Atlantic states were slab on grade with forced air ducts in the slab.
My original house had.
Oh, that's right. Your original house is slab on grade. I forgot that.
Yeah, and it was all ductwork underneath. It was an elevated slab, and all the ductwork was underneath. When I retrofitted the floor, and that's that first time I actually did the double layer plywood over foam, kind of what we did at Matt's house. I did that back in 98, something like that. With Joe helped me out on that detail. So, but I went around and took all the registers, packed them with EPS, and then foam sealed the EPS in all the registers before we put the foam across the top of the slab and retrofitted
and so
it.
That, I mean, basically we're getting back to that point that we always talk about. Keep the things that are inside the envelope,
yeah.
And keep the things that should be outside. And so we're talking about control yet again.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about radon too is I know we had talked about it. It's, local municipality and stuff. When you look on the map, obviously there's places that seem, like Iowa or North Dakota is another state where it is all zone 1. But there's other states that are predominantly zone 3. And I've actually had a couple people call me in zone 3 and say, hey, we have a house here that has a radon problem. How do you typically deal with it?
Oh, that's interesting.
So there are pockets of it around. So I guess my point here is just because you might live in, Central Florida or Central Texas or Northern California in zone 1, don't think that there isn't the potential for a problem.
Yeah.
Because there is.
Yeah.
And this one was hinging on someone buying the house. The levels that were tested were so high that it was a new house that was getting sold like 2 or 3 years later. And the new homeowners had it tested, and it was high. So the builder had to then come in and retrofit a system.
Yeah, man, retrofit is a pain and expensive compared to doing it right at construction.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing a project in Texas right now, and it's a series of grade beams. The foundation guy looked at me like I had 4 heads when I showed him, because I have a bunch of perforated transfer pipes that can, because it's like a 3,500 square foot slab, but it's broken down into probably 8 pockets of like 400 square feet because of the grade beams.
Yeah.
So if I put a radon vent in these 2, then the other 6 aren't getting treated. So we actually put in pipes that they poured the grade beam around so that we can get some lateral transfer through the whole system.
Interesting. And so you have a single vertical chase or riser?
We actually have two because it's a ranch plan and it's, spread out that those two pipes are probably about 60 feet away from each other.
And was that you making that design decision? Did you talk with your client about it, or?
Well, I talked with them, but it's, things like that. The talk goes something like, I'm going to put two radon vents in, one over here and one over there. So when you see these, pipes coming up through the slab, you know what they are.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the conversation.
Yeah. So they're trusting your judgment as a high performance architect. Cool.
Well, it's that don't let the tail wag the dog thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think and I just decided to look, and I'm going to speak without looking like I normally.
Well, it's good that you're starting to make decisions, Jake.
I think that the code also calls out for it to be labeled, by the way. I think it's supposed to say radon on the pipe.
Oh, interesting.
So that people don't dump sewer into it at some point during a remodel.
When you get them professionally installed, meaning like there's companies that'll come out and retrofit, not meaning that like a plumber isn't professional, but what I'm saying is here in New England, if you have a radon, you can get it tested and then they come in and they put it and there's a little meter or gauge on the outside so you can see it. But they actually do have the label that says radon vent and it has an arrow for direction of flow and all of that stuff. Yeah. So
our plumbers install for us at rough end so that it's just one, at groundwork, so that it's just one contractor taking care of that. And actually, I have, and Peter, I don't know if you know this, I have a new carpenter to my crew, Sydney. She's 18 or 19 years old. She's very green. This is her first job in construction. And at the house Steve and I have going right now, the Hilltop house, Steve, the plumber, is probably in his late 50s, maybe mid 50s. Very cocky, a very good plumber too, deservedly so with the cockiness on his knowledge of plumbing. And Sydney walked in and went, "That one's not radon. That one's the sewer." I was like, "How do you know?" She was like, "Well, if you go down to the basement where that pipe goes through, it says radon. And where that pipe goes through, it goes over and dumps into the sewer." And I was just like, that's fantastic. Yeah. I love it when the newest person on the site catches the person who probably has the most experience about anybody making a mistake. And I'm like, "Hey, the only problem that we had in the house was that the radon's labeled incorrectly." And he's like, "Oh, BS. BS." I was like, "Well, let's go take a look at it." And he does that marching thing. And I was just like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, that's a good catch." And I was like, "Oh, it wasn't me, it was Sid." He's like, "Oh, wow, crap."
I love it when plumbers say crap.
Yeah. So what else do we need to know for our radon discussion? What have we missed? Anything?
No, I think, the good news is there's really good resources on the EPA's website in terms of the national map by county and then how to design mitigation systems for new construction and retrofit. So it's a pretty well laid out system at this point.
I think that for the longest time, even at the beginning of the radon stuff, I kind of felt like it was a BS thing. I remember one of my plumbers saying, "That's rich white people problems. They don't have that kind of thing in Mexico. Like, ain't nobody in Mexico worried about radon." And I kind of felt this same way for the longest time. It's odorless, it's tasteless, it causes lung cancer, but it causes lung cancer more prevalently in people that already smoke. And so there's like a whole bunch of stuff when I first learned
if you're
about
an Iowa farm wife.
Yeah, housewife. I just wasn't convinced. But the second you start looking into it, you're like, oh, this is something that we should take very seriously and that we should be very concerned with the houses that we're building. I mean, we talk nonstop about indoor air quality.
Yeah.
Well, look what it did to Peter's basement. I mean, that's testament to if you're building a high performance home, it's something that you obviously need to be more concerned about than not.
Well, and the other thing too is there are people that question the medical studies because it's not like we have, reams and reams and reams of data, especially at these very low levels, right? I mean, we know about cancer when the levels are quite a bit higher, but extrapolating that down to the lower ones. But the question is, why would you mess with this? If you can relatively easily and cheaply control it, manage it, why wouldn't you do that?
What's actually exactly where I was headed, Peter. I'm already putting in 4 inches of gravel under my concrete slab. I'm already putting in 6 mil poly as a vapor barrier.
Yeah,
I'm already detailing things to not have the funky soil smell in my basement.
And you already hired a grumpy plumber.
And I already have a grumpy plumber on site.
So it's not like he's going to get grumpier.
Yeah, exactly. So all we've added really is one future outlet, an electrical drop, one roof penetration, and some 3-inch pipe, and 2 hours worth of my plumber's time.
And a guaranteed no problem at resale to your client. Because if they discover later, it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not, it's the law. If you discover it later, we know that the retro systems are way more expensive than getting it right the first time. So,
hence why there's an entire industry of trucks that say radon mitigation and Missouri radon specialist and those sorts of things, because it's a pain in the butt and there's money in
Missouri radon specialist.
I think that that's one of the local ones. It might be Missouri radon or something of the sort. But anytime that you see a truck with the problem labeled on it, you can guarantee that there's a more expensive way to fix it.
And Jake, I just want to reinforce, you start off by saying that radon is a gas, and I have never had so much fun as this session. It's a gas, man.
Yeah, thrilling.
And there's our podcast for today. I wanted to say thank you guys for listening. Don't forget you can email us, questions@unbuilditpodcast.com. Please subscribe to the podcast. By doing so, it automatically downloads, and it gives us a sense the day we publish, we can get a better view of how many listeners we have. The podcast is continuing to grow. We're very grateful for you listeners out there in the internet world. And please,
I think every subscriber should make it their duty over the course of the next 7 days to get a minimum of 1 new subscriber, but potentially 2 added to the list. So.
I agree. That would be fantastic. And then don't forget to go to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. That helps other people find it organically. The higher the rating we have, the more downloads we have, the more likely other people will find it organically and not just through us promoting it or promoting it on Instagram. So tell a friend, leave a review,
I hate that word,
subscribe.
by the way.
What word?
Organically. I just hate it.
Organically?
Yeah, just I don't know. It's so widely used, and
it is.
I don't like it as a reference. To us. Yeah, I know.
So
I just
they
hate
get
it.
To hear this.
I hate organically. If I've never heard it again in my life, I would be probably a pretty happy guy.
You've just said it a bunch of times. I wasn't even thinking about it.
Yeah, you did. You said it more times than I said it.
Well, that's because I had to make reference to it.
Okay. Thank you for listening
to the
podcast.
Disdain for it.
Cut his mic.
What an organic ending to the podcast. Have a good day.
See you guys.